31 years old, a therapist's office, third session, and the therapist said something that didn't land as a compliment. You share very openly, very quickly, with almost everyone. A pause, then, does it ever actually make you feel less alone? 3 seconds of silence, the question sitting there, and the honest answer arriving before they could stop it. No, it doesn't, it never has, it just briefly interrupts it. And the interruption was what they'd been chasing for years, mistaking relief for connection. The oversharing wasn't the problem, it was the symptom, and the disease had a name they weren't ready to say out loud yet. If you want to understand exactly why this happens, hit that like button. Welcome to Unfiltered Adulthood, where we explore the quiet shifts that reshape us. Subscribe, and let's get back to the story. It didn't start as oversharing, it started as relief. The first time it worked, they were 19, a bad week, a near stranger at a party who asked how they were doing and actually waited for the answer, and something opened, the whole interior, the family situation, the thing at school, the fear they hadn't named yet, all of it, out, in 20 minutes, to someone whose last name they didn't know. And the stranger didn't leave, didn't flinch, just listened. And for the first time in months, the weight lifted, not gone, just briefly, just enough, and the body memorized that equation: disclosure equals relief, openness equals oxygen, telling someone equals not being alone in it anymore. The equation was wrong, but it would take years to find that out. By their mid-20s the pattern had settled into something automatic, something that didn't require a decision. New person, warmth detected, the interior began to surface, the recent difficulty, the ongoing situation, the thing they were still processing, offered early, offered fully, before the relationship had the structure to hold it, before the other person had context, before trust had been built through anything other than the act of sharing itself. 6 friendships in 3 years, each one beginning with that same accelerated intimacy, that same feeling of finally being known. And each one eventually producing the same slight recalibration in the other person's eyes, the same invisible step backward, the same careful politeness that replaced the early warmth, and each time, the verdict filed internally: too much, again, always too much. They didn't connect the pattern to the loneliness, they connected it to themselves, to something defective in the delivery, something they needed to fix, something that kept making people step back. And so they tried to fix it, tried to share less, stay quieter, keep more behind the wall, and the loneliness got louder, not quieter, because the wall didn't know the difference between protection and isolation. The relief was real, that's the thing, it wasn't invented, wasn't imagined, the sharing genuinely produced a sensation of connection, genuine and immediate and warm. It just didn't last, it never lasted past the drive home, and by morning the loneliness had refilled, unchanged, patient, waiting. The therapist's office was the 3rd attempt at getting this right. 2 before it, both abandoned within 4 sessions, both for the same reason: they'd shared too much too quickly. The therapist had become another person to manage, another relationship to perform inside, another room where the interior had been handed over before it was safe, and the irony of oversharing in the one place designed to receive it was not lost on them, just unfixable at the time. This one was different only in that they'd stayed long enough to hear the question: does it ever actually make you feel less alone? And the 3 seconds before the answer were the most honest 3 seconds they'd had in years. No, it doesn't, it never has, it just briefly interrupts it. They sat with that sentence for the rest of the session, through the walk home, through the evening, through the specific insomnia of someone who has accidentally told themselves the truth. 11 days of sitting with it, not sharing it with anyone, which was itself a new experience, the discomfort of holding something real without immediately looking for somewhere to put it. What emerged in those 11 days wasn't comfortable. The loneliness had a shape now, visible, nameable, no longer disguised as a need for connection but recognizable as something older, something that predated the pattern by decades, something that had been present so long it had been mistaken for personality, for identity, for just the way they were. They were not someone who shared too much. They were someone who had been lonely for so long, in a way so invisible, so thoroughly hidden inside a full and social life, that the body had developed its own emergency system, its own pressure valve, its own method of briefly, imperfectly, at significant cost, producing the sensation of being known. The sharing wasn't the problem, it had never been the problem. It was the only solution available to a need that had never been correctly identified, the only tool in reach for a wound that had never been correctly located. The change didn't look like healing, it looked like discomfort, extended, deliberately. The therapist didn't say share less, that wasn't the prescription, that had already been tried, that had already made things worse. The wall was not the answer, the prescription was slower, more specific, harder to execute. Before sharing, ask what you actually need from this moment, from this person, in this room. Not rhetorically. Actually, sitting with the question for a beat before opening, identifying the need with some precision, and then asking whether this person, this relationship, this moment was actually equipped to meet it. Most of the time, the answer was no, not because the people were wrong, not because the relationships were insufficient, but because the need was specific, old, and not something a single conversation with any person could resolve. And recognizing that, clearly, before speaking, changed the quality of what came out. The first 3 weeks were almost silent, not performed silence, not the old wall, just the genuine absence of urgency, the need quieted slightly by the act of being seen by someone, finally, for what it actually was, and the silence was uncomfortable, the loneliness still present, but no longer driving every interaction toward the same destination, no longer turning every warm look into an emergency exit. One conversation, week 4, a close friend, something real, something current, something appropriate to the relationship and its history, shared at a normal pace, without urgency, without the interior emptying all at once, and the friend responded, and the response landed, and the connection was real, not performed, not accelerated, not purchased at the cost of exposure. It was smaller than the old relief, quieter, less dramatic, less immediately felt, and it lasted past the drive home. This is not a story about being fixed. The loneliness is still there, structurally, it doesn't disappear because it's been named, doesn't resolve because the mechanism has been understood, it's older than the therapy, older than the pattern, built from something that happened long before any of this and won't be fully dismantled in a single year of sitting with it. But the relationship to it changed, and that, it turned out, was the only part that was ever actually available to change. The urgency quieted, not gone, but no longer running every social interaction like an engine underneath, no longer turning warmth into a trigger, no longer reading a kind look as permission to empty the interior, and the conversations that followed were different, not better necessarily, just more accurately sized to the relationship they were happening inside. Some people got less of them. People who had been receiving the full interior by default, people who had been drafted into holding something they hadn't signed up for, and some of those relationships contracted, became smaller and more honest simultaneously, which is a less comfortable thing than it sounds and a more accurate one. The oversharing didn't stop entirely, there are still moments, still the familiar pull, still the old equation presenting itself as a solution. But there is now a beat before it, a question in the beat, a moment of actual choice where before there had only been reflex. That beat is small, it costs nothing dramatic, it changes very little from the outside, and from the inside, it is the difference between being driven and driving. The loneliness that makes you share everything with everyone isn't looking for an audience, it's looking for a witness, and those are not the same thing.